Medics were responding to a 911 call of a child not breathing. Again, it's a homicide investigation. I also learned that Dorothy's two boys, ages 5 and 2, were taken from the home and placed into protective custody.
How can this guy do that? This is just a baby. This is just a little tiny child that has no way to fight back, no way to, protect herself.
Neighbors tell me Roden and the child's mother, Dorothy Wing, only met recently, and he moved in with her just a couple of weeks ago.
Evangelina Wing was born January 22, 2011. She lived in the city of Seaside in Oregon. Now, during Halloween of 2014, her mother, Dorothy Wing, met Randy Roden. 1 week later, Randy moved into the apartment where Dorothy resided, with her 3 young children, one of which was Evangelina. Evangelina was approaching her 3rd birthday. Randy began caring for the children regularly when Dorothy was away at work. In the month and a half that followed, the children sustained numerous injuries. By December 19, 2014, Evangelina had become quite lethargic. Then, in the early hours of December 20th, she was found dead in her bed. Dorothy called 911 and police responded to the scene. They reported the child was not breathing. Emergency responders found Evangelina in full rigor mortis, with bruises and injuries all over her body. Evangelina was found lying on her side on a bed in her mother's room. It appeared Evangelina had not recently been bathed. There was discoloring around her neck, a lesion on the top of her head, blood in her earlobe, and more marks on the other ear. There were fingernail marks near her mouth. Her left arm was injured from her shoulder to her wrist and was wrapped in an ace bandage, and a doctor noticed the humerus in her left arm was deformed. Wow, a deformed humerus. I don't think I've ever heard that before. There were marks on both hands, adult-sized chunk marks on every finger, and she was missing a fingernail on both of her hands. There were bruises on both legs in multiple places. An autopsy determined Evangelina died due to blunt force trauma. So then Randy, Dorothy, and the other children went to the police station, where a Department of Human Services, a caseworker, evaluated the kids and noticed their injuries. So they took the kids into custody for further evaluation. The kids were taken to the Randall Children's Hospital. There it was determined by a pediatrician who specialized in such matters that their injuries were indicative of child assault. Meanwhile, the state's deputy medical examiner autopsied Evangelina and concluded that she died from battered child syndrome with terminal blunt force head trauma. As part of its investigation into the children's injuries and the girl's death, the state obtained a warrant to search Randy's phone. Dorothy told police Evangelina got hurt from falling off the toilet a few days before. You muppet, you don't get all those injuries simply from falling off the toilet. The 2 other boys who were in the house had similar injuries and were taken to the hospital for treatment. One of them told police his mum and her boyfriend often kept the kids chained up like dogs inside the apartment. So with the evidence they had at this moment, Randy was arrested and charged. An indictment said that Randy had been mistreating Evangelina since October 2014. He had harmed the 2 boys in the home. They were aged 5 and 2. Randy himself had a criminal past, including a domestic violence case in the year 2012. This involved 2 women with charges of sexual assault, throttling, and kidnapping. This guy's a real piece of work, huh? Randy pled no contest to coercion and he went to prison and served only 10 months. But Randy did violate his probation when he changed where he was living and moved in with Dorothy. He did not have permission from the Department of Corrections to move. Dorothy herself was also arrested. She was indicted on 8 charges. This included murder by assault, first-degree murder, by manslaughter, 6 counts of criminal mistreatment. The prosecutors say that she left her children with Randy knowing that he was a violent man who had been mistreating them. So, over the course of the trial, the prosecution and defense presented their cases. The state created a timeline to paint a picture of Randy's role in the death. It showed a picture that, while not perfect, the family was generally healthy in the past. Dorothy held a job. The oldest child attended school. And although Dorothy was harsh with the children at times, the children's medical problems were few and minor. Photographs from the preceding summer depicted the children happy and injury-free. The state contended that this all changed the moment Randy arrived. She only knew him a week, or dated him a week, and he moved in. What? It was revealed Randy was a dishonest, drug-addicted, controlling man with a history of aggression towards small children. The state noted that Randy, more so than Dorothy, cared for and therefore had the opportunity to mistreat the children during the time leading up to the incident. The state also had DNA evidence from clothing at the apartment, drug tests, and testimony from multiple acquaintances that Randy, not Dorothy, harmed the children. The state also called a number of medical experts to testify about the children's injuries and their potential causes. 2 medical examiners testified about the girl's post-mortem condition. They testified that blunt force head trauma was the cause of death. They discovered hemorrhages in her scalp, and in her skull there was significant trauma in her brain, which they described as a very severe concussion. They noted numerous other injuries to her head and body. They said she had cauliflower ears, which commonly occurs among boxers and wrestlers as a result of damaged blood vessels and dead cartilage. She had various contusions, abrasions, lacerations on her face and head, including lesions on her nose, ear, and scalp, some of which were infected. The tissue between her lip and teeth was destroyed, discolored, and infected. Damage that medical examiners believed to be caused by trauma to the mouth. Her left arm was broken, purple, and swollen, with a spiral fracture to the humerus. They surmised that such a break would occur as a result of someone grabbing and jerking the child by the arm. Wow. Various areas of her torso, arms, hands, and her legs had contusions, abrasions, lacerations, and swelling. The state also called a pediatrics professor as a witness. Based on a review of medical records, the injuries were clearly caused by multiple episodes of inflicted trauma. 4 doctors and an ER nurse testified to the injuries of the other 2 children. They generally agreed the boys appeared to have been assaulted. One of them had a face that was marked and swollen. Both eyes had hemorrhaging, which generally occurred due to direct trauma, and they were nearly swollen shut. His scalp had red bumps and lesions. The doctors believed the child had healing burns on their nose and ears, which were bruised and encrusted. His mouth had extensively damaged tissue, which can occur from blunt trauma, and his lips and tongue had lesions. His hands had lacerations, abrasions, bruising, blistering, and crusting, with what appeared to be a smolder mark. His fingers were bruised and he had a skin infection. The boy had scattered marks and abrasions across his torso. His pelvis was fractured, which was thought to be a higher force injury and very unusual for a child. The injuries to the other boy, because yes, what I just read out was one of the boys. This is so bad. Now the injuries to the other boy, he had hemorrhaging. His ears had marks and scabs, and his nose had abrasions. He had bruising, swelling, and tenderness on his face, and a puncture wound in his mouth that allowed air into soft tissue of his jaw and resulted in bruising and swelling. He also had bruising on the base of his skull, on his ears, scalp, neck, shoulders, torso, hip, and groin. He had a lesion on his right forearm that looked like an older smolder mark, including a deep laceration on the thumb. So, as for Randy and the defense, they had a different strategy. They shifted the blame onto the mother Dorothy, whom Randy characterized as a manipulative, violent, and abusive woman. He conceded that the children were physically abused, had traumatic injuries, and needed medical care, but he asserted that Dorothy was the wrongdoer. To support that theory, he cited statements by her and other witnesses regarding her treatment towards the children, and he offered photographs showing the children with injuries before his arrival. Randy also contended that Evangelina died from sepsis-induced organ failure resulted from a staph infection. He acknowledged that Evangelina had suffered blunt force trauma to her head, but maintained that this was not the ultimate cause of her death. Randy stressed that the girl had a very severe and dangerous staph infection that entered her bloodstream and led to infectious abscesses in her heart, brain, and lungs that ultimately ended in organ failure. The defense's examination of medical experts focused heavily on this infection and sepsis. Randy called on a pediatric forensic pathologist as a witness. This witness testified that staph had invaded her bloodstream, resulting in sepsis that was fatal. The pathologist said that sepsis could go undetected and progress rapidly into irreversible shock. She concluded that bacterial abscesses in her heart played a role in the girl's death and concluded that she died from sepsis. She scrutinized the autopsy report, criticizing the examiner's failure to explore infectious causes of death or to biopsy more sections of Evangelina's heart in light of the known invasive bacteria in the brain and heart. The defense also believed that the medical examiner should have biopsied the girl's lesions. She stated that the available information was insufficient for any forensic pathologist to conclude that Evangelina died from head trauma rather than sepsis. On cross-examination, the prosecution's experts acknowledged that the girl had infections in her body, including her brain, heart, lungs, and scalp, and agreed that her heart had begun to die before her heart actually stopped beating. The prosecution did confirm that Evangelina had some degree of sepsis and said that the brain and heart most likely became infected due to the infection in the bloodstream. Now, Randy's attorneys did question the medical examiner's decision to forego testing for staph infection, and the examiner replied that doing so would have been futile given the rapid growth of bacteria in the deceased and the limited inferences he could draw as a result. But again, Randy's attorneys went with this line of questioning. No one tested Evangelina for infections. How do we know it wasn't that? There is some evidence showing she could have died from this. In fact, they even claimed that many of her wounds, including fingernail loss, ear abnormalities, oral tissue damage, and the nose laceration, were symptoms of the infection. They also contended that the girl's infection was supported by the presence of bacteria in her house. In particular, Randy claimed that the two boys were highly infected. Yes, but that doesn't explain the burn and the bite marks, you muppet. But still, he contended that the bites and the burns were actually misidentified symptoms of such infections. He highlighted that doctors deemed it necessary to prescribe the boys heavy-duty antibiotics and that the wounds would disappear after. However, the state provided testimony that the children did indeed suffer human bites. The evidence served multiple purposes, showing that an adult caused the injuries. You see, the state called on a forensic odontologist to the stand. He examined the photographs of the children's injuries and determined with certainty that the marks on them were bite marks on the chin, wrist, and ears. All the marks were similar, and the odontologist attributed the marks to an adult. So, with all those grisly details, and to conclude, prosecutors call this the worst instance of child abuse in the county's history. Randy himself was sentenced to 40 years in prison. This was in 2016. Dorothy, however, pleaded guilty to manslaughter and criminal mistreatment. She was only given 15 years because she had an agreement where she would testify against Randy. Now check this out. Randy, the cheeky, slimy bastard. So after his sentencing, he went to the Oregon Court of Appeals. They ruled that during the trial, the prosecution failed to present an adequate scientific foundation for expert testimony regarding the bite marks. In other words, they threw that out of the bathwater. So Randy was resentenced to 20 years. Bro, what? All those injuries. I don't think I've ever mentioned this many body parts in a video. Ears, hands, mouth, legs, skull, torso. You name it, he injured it. And he only got 20 years. Fucking disgraceful. Comment, tell me what you think. Now the case of Darlene van der Giesen.
A woman goes missing.
An obvious possibility was an abduction.
Many say that love is blind, but is that really the case? Because in today's true crime case, it is jealousy that has switched off all the lights of sanity and humanity. It is jealousy that burns a person from the inside like fire burns wood, and sometimes serves as a motivation for some gruesome and extremely horrible actions. Brace yourself for a murder story motivated by jealousy with some gory, grisly details. Daphne Antoinette Wright was born in 1963, and when she was only 10 months old, she contracted rubella and became permanently deaf. Daphne had a good relationship with her father, but not a very strong one with her mother. Growing up was quite hard for poor Daphne because being deaf invited a lot of challenges. Her mother was not cooperative and learned sign language only after Daphne became a teenager. After her father lost his battle with cancer, Daphne was suffering from depression, and she started self-harming, but somehow she was able to get through life. In August 2004, 42 years old Daphne and her girlfriend Sally Collins, also deaf, started living together with one of Daphne's friends, Jackie Chesmore. But Jackie and Daphne were not just friends, they had a little history of being in a relationship. This made things a little awkward, and Sally and Jackie were not enjoying each other's company. In September, Sally and Daphne broke up, and Sally moved out and went to live in an apartment complex called the Deaf Apartments in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. These apartments were not specifically for the deaf, but since the complex had many deaf residents, it became commonly known as the Deaf Apartments. And this is where Sally met another deaf woman by the name of Darlene Vander Giesen. Darlene and Sally soon became friends and would often hang out together, but their relationship was not viewed as just friends by Daphne. Even after their breakup, Daphne told others around her that her relationship with Sally was still going strong. This is because Daphne still had feelings for Sally, and she was starting to get a little bit jealous about this newfound friendship of Sally's. Daphne wanted to get back with Sally, but the feeling was not mutual. Instead of moving on like a dignified person, Daphne clung to Sally, and when the two were not getting back, she started blaming Darlene. She started to believe that Darlene is the reason why Sally did not want to get back with Daphne. But you have to break it down and understand what's actually going on here. I'm pontificating, but Daphne, since 9 months old or whenever it was, she was permanently deaf, communicating via sign language. I can only imagine the ridicule she would have experienced in school, in college, the institutions where you meet people and form relationships. She may have felt unwanted. She may have felt unappreciated. She may have felt like an outsider. Then all of a sudden, at the age of 42, someone comes along, Sally that is, and accepts her. Finally, Daphne feels like she's in a place where she belongs. You understand? Then it all gets taken away. And Daphne is scrambling in her mind to try and get it back. Then she feels a threat by Darlene. This is my reason on why she looked at Darlene the way she did. It was only a matter of time before Daphne started feeling jealous of Sally's new friend. In Daphne's mind, Sally and Darlene were romantically involved, and Darlene was intentionally trying to create a rift between the two lovers. This seed of jealousy, hatred, and mistrust slowly started to germinate in Daphne's heart. But of course, this was all a fantasy world that Daphne had created in her mind. None of this was actually true. In fact, Darlene was actually in a relationship with a man, but Daphne just kept ignoring all these facts. One day, near the end of January 2006, Daphne visited Sally's apartment unannounced, and to her surprise, Darlene was also at the apartment. And when Daphne saw her, all hell broke loose. In Daphne's mind, Darlene was not just chatting with Sally like a normal friend, but was trying to make sure Sally does not reconcile with Daphne. Daphne and Darlene got into a physical altercation. Daphne shouted at her, "Why are you destroying our relationship?" she said. She even gestured a middle finger to Darlene, who left the apartment after a while. After she was gone, Daphne and Sally started arguing. Later, Sally requested that Daphne to leave the apartment multiple times, but she refused to do as she said. Then Sally went to her neighbor's apartment and called the police. The police came and forced Daphne to leave the apartment. She did eventually leave, but Daphne looked at Sally and she said, "You will be sorry about this." After a few days, on February the 1st, 2006, Daphne and Darlene met at a Pizza Hut restaurant to work out the surprise for Sally on Valentine's Day. Darlene saw this as something unusual because Daphne and Darlene did not get along, but Darlene's thinking, well, if this is for Sally's Valentine's, then sure, I'll meet you and I can help. Now, Darlene herself had a job at the JD's House of Trophies in Sioux Falls. In the days to come, Darlene did not show up at work. This was unusual for Darlene's co-workers because she did not usually take a leave. She also had not informed her boss of her absence prior to the leave. Her boss called her parents and informed them about the peculiar situation. Darlene's parents started calling her, but she was not picking up her phone. They could not get in contact with her. Worried about their daughter's safety, Darlene's parents drove from Rock Valley, Iowa to her apartment in Sioux Falls in South Dakota. They noticed that Darlene's car was not in the apartment parking lot, so they assumed that maybe she'd gone out on a trip or something. When they entered her apartment, nothing in there looked peculiar, but then something happened that got them really worried. On the kitchen counter, they found Darlene's phone, and they noticed when they went through the phone that there had been no activity from Darlene in the past few days. Darlene had gone somewhere without her cell phone and had not returned for 2 days. Her parents instantly knew that something did not add up. Darlene's family reported her missing on February the 3rd, 2006. The police came to the apartment and began an investigation and a search for the missing girl. The next day, investigators were tipped off about an abandoned truck in a Pizza Hut parking lot. They went over to retrieve the truck and it turned out to be Darlene's vehicle. The police had found Darlene's truck, but no Darlene. Darlene's ID card, her keys, her wallet and her belongings were also not in the vehicle. After this discovery, the police became certain that this missing person case had more disturbing layers to it. The police interviewed Darlene's parents and they told the police that Darlene had been involved in internet dating, and they did warn her about it, but she continued talking to people on the internet. Consequently, police sent Darlene's laptop to the forensic lab for gathering evidence. While the police were investigating, Darlene's friends visited her parents to console them. Sally and Daphne also met with the parents at their house. Daphne was giving the parents a hug and telling them, "I hope to see Darlene come back soon. I will pray for you." The forensic team, while digging into Darlene's internet activity, discovered that 10 days before her disappearance, several emails were sent to Darlene by someone named Wendy Smith. The emails were written out of jealousy, hatred, and a grudge. The sender called Darlene stupid, ugly, fat, and a troublemaker. This Wendy Smith also called her elephant feet, which I'm not gonna lie is fucking hilarious. There were many more curse words in these emails. One email in particular caught the eyes of the police. It was not sent by Wendy Smith, but by a woman named Daphne Antoinette Wright. The email said, "Hi, this is Colin's lover. As you know who I am, right? I'm very disappointed in you because you always visit Colin's when I'm not there. Enough, please, thanks." The investigators carefully analyzed the emails and noticed a pattern in them. They observed that there were many grammatical errors in the text. And just like Sherlock Holmes, using only the contents of the emails, the investigators determined that the sender was a deaf person. The police tried to find a Wendy Smith in Darlene's social circle, but they came up short. They couldn't find anyone by that name. They requested detailed information about the user of the account by the name of Wendy Smith. It certainly seemed that the investigators were moving toward the truth. While they were waiting for more information on Wendy Smith, they started looking into Darlene's love life and discovered that Darlene had been dating a man named Jeff Flynn, who she met online. Police, hoping Jeff could help them, they go to his apartment, but he wasn't there. 4 days later, Jeff returned to his home. The police interrogated him and he told them that he had gone to visit some friends. Still, the police's suspicions remained. After all, they had a person of interest who was not just the victim's boyfriend, but also someone who left town for a while right when the victim went missing. They were, of course, thinking of him as a potential suspect. The police got a search warrant for his car. When they searched his car, they discovered dry bloodstains, but forensic experts confirmed these were the bloodstains of a deer. So the question remained, who was Wendy Smith? Around this time, the police were given details about the sender of the emails. The emails had been sent by a computer that belonged to a person named Jackie Chesmore. The police located this individual, and Jackie willingly drove to the police station for an interview along with Daphne Wright. Since Daphne was deaf, her interview was conducted with a sign language interpreter. She told the police that she first met Darlene at the American Sign Language Club and then became well acquainted with her and would often meet her at the deaf apartments. Now, when the police discovered that Daphne was also deaf, some alarms in their heads went off because the sender of the emails was also determined to be deaf. When confronted about the emails, Daphne initially denied sending the emails, but later admitted to it when the police were persistent with their suspicions. Then, when she was questioned about the last time she saw Darlene, her answer changed frequently. First, she claimed that the last time she saw her was on January the 29th. She also said that the two never intended to meet at Pizza Hut. Later, she claimed that the two did have plans to meet, but she could not go because her car ran out of gas. Sometime later, she again changed her statement. This time, though, she said that she did go to the Pizza Hut and meet Darlene, but they chatted for only a while, and Daphne left 5 minutes later as she did not have money to order food. Throughout the interrogation, Daphne kept telling police she's not guilty of anything, but these initial lies were enough for the police to start treating Daphne as a suspect. The police started investigating Daphne's activities prior to Darlene's disappearance. They discovered that Daphne had a physical fight with Darlene 5 days before she went missing. When the police questioned Daphne about the fight, she told the officers the truth this time. She stated the night the two had a fight, Darlene was at Sally's apartment. Daphne told police that she had some problems with Sally regarding their relationship, and she also felt that Darlene was instigating further trouble between the two. Now that the police knew Daphne had a grudge against Darlene, and that grudge could serve as a motive to harm her in some way, Daphne became their prime suspect and they got a search warrant for her house. So the police go and they search her house. The first alarm bell they see is a chainsaw. There was a receipt for the purchase of a chainsaw bought from a hardware store in her room on the 3rd of February. Another receipt for the purchase of black garbage bags were also found. She also had almost half a gallon of chainsaw oil in her home. When they entered her basement, they noticed that it smelled strongly of cleaning products. The basement also had patches of fresh blue paint here and there on the walls and the floor. When investigators further looked around, they saw a small storage room that had its entire floor painted with blue paint. Since the paint was fresh, the officers peeled the paint layer off to find bloodstains on the floor, but that was not all. This is when police observed chainsaw cut marks on the basement floor. A forensic team started examining the basement to gather any evidence. In the storage room of the basement, they found small amounts of human bone and tissues. The bones and tissues were used to make a DNA profile. The DNA profile was compared with Darlene's DNA profile made using the DNA from her toothbrush and hairbrush. The police, Darlene's family, and everyone waited for the results of the DNA comparison. And when the results came back, it was a match. On February the 10th, Daphne Antoinette Wright was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, second-degree felony murder, and aggravated kidnapping. The police now knew that Darlene's life was taken, but they still hadn't found her body. They knew that the murderer had dismembered her using the chainsaw. The police started searching Daphne's neighborhood, thinking that Daphne might have thrown her dismembered body in the trash. The police checked all the trash cans in the neighborhood, but found nothing. Then, they went to Sioux Falls landfill. For 5 days in the violent winter, The police officers searched every inch of every trash bag in the 490-acre landfill so that no stone was left unturned. On February the 11th, 2006, police found the legs and the torso of a woman. When DNA tests were done, it was confirmed that the body parts belonged to Darlene. They also found Darlene's ASL sweatshirt with bloodstains on it. When the clothing was sent for the collection of forensic evidence, it was found that there were DNAs of two different individuals on the shirt. The blood belonged to Darlene, but the DNA belonged to Daphne. On March the 28th, Darlene's upper body was also found in a ditch near the Minnesota border. Her head had been wrapped in a plastic bag by using a cord. Now, regarding the autopsy, the report revealed the gruesome way in which Daphne killed Darlene. It showed that there was a 7-inch fracture in her skull. Daphne also put a plastic bag around Darlene's head to make sure that she did not receive oxygen. She died either due to blunt force trauma to the head or due to suffocation or both. The autopsy also revealed that this much torment was still not enough to end the jealousy in Daphne's heart. She first tried to burn the body, and that's when she resorted to dismembering it. And the autopsy did confirm that Darlene was dead at the time of dismemberment. Now, when all the evidence was gathered and Daphne could provide no possible explanation for her not being the one who murdered Darlene, she then revealed all the horrible details to the police on what happened that night. On the night of the murder, Daphne invited Darlene to a restaurant to have a chat and prepare a surprise for Sally. Darlene came to the restaurant in her own truck, but after eating, Daphne insisted that Darlene go with her to her home. Darlene, unaware of the sinister intention behind Daphne's invitation, innocently got into Daphne's car and left her truck in the parking lot of the restaurant. After that, Daphne drove Darlene to her apartment, and this is where she murdered her. She then dismembered her body 2 days after the murder and threw the parts at different locations. The police believe that dismembering Darlene's body was not premeditated. They believe that because Daphne bought the chainsaw after the murder, for 2 days Darlene's body remained in the basement. She must have tried to get rid of it in many ways, but when nothing worked, she resorted to dismembering it and throwing it out. And as mentioned, Daphne was arrested for first-degree murder, second-degree felony murder, and kidnapping. It was rumored that Daphne could be sentenced to death and become the first criminal in South Dakota to be executed in 60 years. But a debate was starting on whether Daphne should face the death penalty given her disability. So the trial started on April the 12th, 2007. Since Daphne was impaired, there needed to be proper arrangements in court so that she could understand whatever was going on, especially the legal concepts being discussed. The following steps were taken in the court to make Daphne feel more comfortable. Number 1, a certified deaf interpreter was employed by the court to allow Daphne and her lawyers to communicate with one another before the trials began. Number 2, she was also provided with 5 level 5 certified American Sign Language interpreters. 3 would help Daphne by translating to her whatever was being said, and the other 2 would help Daphne communicate with her legal team. Number 3, a projector was also present in the room. The projector projected every word written by the court reporter so that Daphne could easily read them all. Number 4, the trial was also recorded on camera. These recordings included the interpretation of the sign language interpreters in particular. These recordings were then sent to Daphne, who reviewed them to make sure no communication errors had occurred. And finally, she was also given the right to request a break if she was confused as to what was being discussed in court. She could take a break, clear away her confusion, and then restart the trial. Daphne exercised this right only once. Now, the prosecution put forward every piece of evidence they had: the DNA evidence, witness statements, and motivation behind the crime. The prosecutors sought the death penalty. There was a discussion about whether or not deaf people should be sentenced to death. Many believe that sentencing should depend on the crime committed and not on the criminal themselves. This view was in uniformity with most of the members of the deaf community. The defense took a different angle. They decided to prove that given her difficult upbringing, Daphne struggled with problem-solving skills. Instead of setting her issues with Daphne using other peaceful methods, Daphne resorted to extreme measures because she never learned to face problems head-on. The defense requested the jury to keep in mind Daphne's inability to solve problems like normal people. In the trial itself, The jury consisted of 11 women and 1 man. During her trial, Sally and Jackie both gave their statements. Sally told the police her account of the physical altercation between the defendant and the victim. She also stated that when she told Daphne about Darlene's disappearance, she did not react in the news in any way. On the night of the 3rd of February, the two were watching a movie after coming back from meeting Darlene's parents. According to Sally, Daphne's demeanor was not normal. She was extremely nervous and she kept smoking. It is alleged that during her testimony, Daphne was crying and wiping tears from her eyes every minute or so. Jackie gave the statement that on the 3rd of February, she saw Daphne remove carpets from the basement of their home. She was also taking out garbage bags and pieces of concrete and putting them in her car. This was probably after she had dismembered and thrown Darlene's body. After all was said and done, Daphne Antoinette Wright was found guilty of first-degree murder and aggravated kidnapping. On April the 18th, 2007, Daphne Wright was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole instead of being sentenced to death. Darlene was laid to rest in the Valley View Cemetery. She was a person full of joy, full of life, and was a pill of happiness for those around her. Darlene must have gotten her loving and innocent nature from her mother. Accounts suggest that Darlene's mother is a loving and warm-hearted person. When the trial ended, Darlene's mother had told Daphne's mother that she forgives her daughter. She actually said to her, she looked over and she said, "We both lost our daughters." As gruesome as this case is, it reveals what jealousy can make a person do. Daphne Wright was a delusional person who was blinded by her jealousy. Her own theories about the relationship between Darlene and Sally made her lose all contact with reality. She was not even able to see that Darlene was already in a relationship with a man. She should not have felt threatened by her. Furthermore, she never focused on the fact that Sally had moved on even before Darlene came into the picture. And we can all agree, with all due respect, you do not need both ears to tell you that what Daphne did was wrong. I believe she had a difficult mental upbringing when it comes to being accepted by society. I don't know for sure, but that's my explanation on why she was so emotionally involved with Sally. But the thing that I can't make sense of is the dismembering. I can't make sense of the killing either, right? But the dismembering I don't get. Like, if you want to get rid of the body, right? Say you pick up a knife or a chainsaw in her case, she starts, I don't know, cutting an arm, right? Blood must have fallen on her face, right? Spat on her face or whatever. Must have gone on all. Surely that makes you feel sick. But then to keep doing it and keep doing it, something must have been shut off. So even though it's unfortunate that most of her life she was deaf, that does not make me feel sorry for her in any way. Comment, tell me what you think.